All right, so what we're going to talk about right now is MVP presentations, what to prepare and what to expect. First to start, what is an MVP? MVP stands for minimum viable product. It's actually something that is used more so in the software engineering space, because if you imagine if they're building like a site and maybe on the site you have a bunch of different features, and MVP for them is like what you have to have at a minimum to have like something running. So it would be like maybe like the home page and maybe like a couple functionality that would make your product differentiable enough. In the data science world, it's a little bit different. So in the data science world, MVP is used very, very, what's the word? It's not used for the same thing every time. It's used very loosely. For me, I like to think of MVP presentations as more of like maybe an EDA presentation. I think for most of you, this might end up being an EDA presentation. But before I get into like the details of what I want to see from these presentations, I'll talk about why an MVP presentation and why preparing for an MVP presentation is important. MVP is basically a product that you're currently working on. It's still in progress, definitely not a finished product. One could argue that your past products are also MVPs and also like, still have a lot of work that you can add to it. But in this case, that in these 8 weeks, at week 4 or at the start of week 5, your product is definitely not the same as what you will be submitting at the end, hopefully for most of you. Why it's important to be able to talk about your project like in an MVP presentation is because a very common question you also might be asked is, what are you currently working on, rather than what is one of your projects that you've already done. And I think that in the process of talking about things that you're working on, there's a lot of space that you can use to talk about the things that you're interested in, the problems that you're currently facing, things that you're trying out. It's kind of like a space where you can talk about things that are very much in progress versus completed. And there are a lot of ways that you can weave in qualities about how you work and how you, ideate processes in an MVP presentation. I will say that for every company and for every interview, what they want exactly from an MVP presentation could be different. For example, I think most relevant, which is not, unfortunately, not going to be the style that we're going to be doing it, is oftentimes in interviews, there is the case study interview. And by the way, one of the sessions towards the end of the capstone phase, I'll be doing like a what to expect from data science technical interviews study group. But anyways, one very popular kind of interview is a case study interview where they present you with their business problem and you kind of have to present, your plan of attack or your project proposal. And that could very much also be like an MVP presentation. So keep that in mind. I'll be talking more in depth about interviews in another study group. But for this MVP presentation, and again, it's going to look very, very different for each of your projects. Time it to be for about 5 minutes. First, introduce your project. No matter where you are at in defining it, because I know that your projects can change very much as you keep working on it. Just tell us about your project. This is also a really good opportunity to just hear about what your fellow classmates are working on. And if you're working on something similar, opportunity to collaborate. So I think very importantly, your business case, like why do your project? That's very, very important. And then if you have any plans for like your modeling, just talk about that as well. During this MVP presentation, also talk about where you're currently at. What part of the project are you working on? This is like maybe like 2 sentences. Maybe you want to talk more about like, oh, why is this taking so long for you to do? Or maybe something along the lines of where does what you're working on fit into the greater part of your project? It really depends on the specific project. Do you have any interesting EDA to show or tell us about? In this presentation, you do not have to prepare a slide deck. I have found that some students like that they created a slide deck for this presentation, just so that they can just build off of it for their final presentation. So if you want to do that, by all means. I'm also okay with y'all scrolling through your Jupyter notebooks. That's fine by me as well. Any hurdles that you've gotten over? I don't want to hear like every single bug that you faced, but if there is something that you think is very meaningful or a challenge that you think will be very, yeah, meaningful to talk about and share, or if you had like a good learning experience for getting over a particular issue you had, share it with us. What you hope to have as a final product. I think this part, it can be interpreted as, all right, this is what I want to have by our final presentation date by May 3rd, or this is what I would love to have as my final product if I had like months more to work on it. So it's really up to you to define. It depends on how much you really thought about your project. And then also what limitations you're encountering or you foresee. So these are some ideas of what you can talk about. Honestly, it is very, very fluid, very flexible what you want to share. I just think it's important to be able to talk about things that you're working on. If you want to like liken this to something, imagine that you're telling, I don't know, maybe you have like another technical friend. Maybe you are telling each other about your projects and what you're working on. That kind of tone. It doesn't have to be formal at all. Again, you don't have to like prepare like a slide deck. I will say, do jot down some points that you want to talk about just so that you have some structure to what you're presenting. But you don't, I would not put more than like 10, 15 minutes into thinking about what you're going to talk about. But yes, any questions regarding these MVP presentations? Cool. Well, if you have any other questions coming up as you're coming up with your MVP presentation, feel free to talk to me about it during your one-on-ones. If not, yeah, that's all I had to share about MVP presentations. I'm excited to see it in a week. Yeah, any final call for questions before I stop the recording and we can talk about some other stuff. Going once, going twice. All right, then let me find the stop button.